14 years after the Vietnam War ended, Washington and Hanoi still do not recognize each other. But unofficially, there are plenty of contacts between Americans and Vietnamese. More and more American veterans, for example, are returning to Vietnam, confronting the enemy, not merely out of curiosity, but as therapy to lay to rest the ghosts of that war. They, at least, are ready to talk and listen to the other side, to hear their war stories. And what they are hearing from North Vietnamese and Viet Cong veterans are stories hauntingly parallel to their own. Some of what you hear in this broadcast may make you uncomfortable, but surely, if Americans who fought are ready to listen, maybe the rest of us should listen too.
Just a feeling coming over me. There is warmer everything I see. Not a cloud in the sky, got a song in my eye. That I want is to cry with us.
The looks and sounds so familiar to a generation of Americans.
And they're telling that I will find.
A pop song sung in fractured English to GIs in a Saigon bar. It is not Saigon, it is Ho Chi Minh City. They are not GIs. They are veterans who've come back to Vietnam. They are hearing war stories from the other side.
I was once chased by a helicopter, and I had to dive into the bush and, wriggle around and get away. Deadly helicopter.
War stories from men a few years ago they would have happily blown away. Men like Nguyen Ngoc Hung of Hanoi, drafted out of school and into the army.
Were you afraid that you would that there was a good chance that you would not come home?
Yes. We didn't actually know how long the war would last. And with all the bombing and fighting, there's no way to say for sure that you would come home after the war. We just hoped, that's all.
In 1972, Hung was in the battle for Quang Tri City, just south of the DMZ. It was a brutally long campaign, fighting South Vietnamese ground troops and American artillery and air power. When South Vietnamese troops finally retook Quang Tri, it was a wasteland of rubble. The North Vietnamese had faded away across the Tac Han River. For Hung, the worst of it was the B-52 raids, and the worst of them was his first one.
Suddenly, the battlefield became very quiet, and we knew something was going to happen. I just looked up into the sky and saw, oh, how beautiful the day was. The sun was shining, and then we saw the bomb, round and big like this. The noise of the bomb, and then we couldn't see anything at all because of the smoke and the dust, and we couldn't hear anything at all.
That was 1972. 4 years earlier, in 1968, the battle that got him into the war, the Tet Offensive. Nowhere was the fighting more fierce than in the ancient city of Hue. The battle for the citadel raged for 26 days. American losses, almost 150 men killed. The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong lost at least 5,000 men. Overall, during Tet, the North lost 25, maybe even as many as 50,000 soldiers. The army was hemorrhaging. In Hanoi, they scraped the bottom of the barrel. They called up the students. Hung was in his second year of graduate school when his student exemption was canceled. He was sent from basic training to the DMZ and then, with the rest of his unit, was ordered to march south down the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
The whole marching down south was a sort of rather physical triumph for me. I was not really very strong.
For Hung, it was a 2.5-month slog, carrying a 60-pound pack, plus his rifle and 5 grenades, plus a few luxuries.
In the end, I threw away the dictionaries, then the books, and then the diaries, and last of all, the guitar went too.
One of our enemies, the foot soldier in the jungle. One of our enemies, distinguished physician in Saigon.
I was one of the 17 who has created the National Front of Liberation of the South.
What we call the Viet Cong.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Dr. Zung Quin Hua is a Saigon pediatrician. Having helped to found the National Liberation Front, her job in the mid-60s was to recruit Saigon intellectuals to the cause. She was rich, educated, and well-connected. She knew General Westmoreland, knew U.S. ambassadors Henry Cabot Lodge and Maxwell Taylor.
I think I was very good relation with the American embassy, the U.S. embassy here.
So you were a spy?
Yes.
During the Tet Offensive of 1968, Saigon became too hot for Dr. Hua. She and her husband took to the jungle and stayed with the Viet Cong until the war's end. Life in the jungle for all enemy soldiers was a misery of shortages of food, medicine, even the most primitive comforts. By contrast, the American presence was marked by excess, especially for the lucky ones based near Saigon, where everything seemed available. And even in the field, the Pentagon was determined that there be regular mail call, tape call.
You know, you've been gone exactly 1 month and 20 days today, according to my record. Gee, it seems like such a long time. I'll be glad when you're home. Yeah, my little hubby home.
Such luxury, even a letter, was unthinkable to men like Hung.
Some of us brought along with us letters from sweethearts and girlfriends they received before they left for the South. And we passed the letters among ourselves and read and laugh and, tease the man with the letters, and that was sort of sharing feelings, sharing sentiments and other things with your friends. And that was nice.
Hung's favorite memory of the war was in 1971. After a period of heavy fighting, Hung's unit was sent north of the DMZ to wait out the rainy season.
On the way, we met a lot of girls coming along the road, and they were carrying supplies and ammunition for the front. And we had good talks to each other, and they were really very good. Mm-hmm.
More than good talks?
Yes, you can say it.
For the North Vietnamese, as high as morale was claimed to be, there were problems, especially after the massive casualties of the Tet Offensive.
Were there many people desert from your units who just could not take it anymore?
Not many, but in my unit we've got some. I know one of the soldiers in my unit who were terribly brave. But one day when he came back after the fighting, he told me about the killing and the thing. And at night he had a nightmare about it. And the next day he couldn't eat anything. He told me that when he looked at the meat, he just imagined that it was a human meat. And they couldn't eat. And, he deserted. He was really a very brave soldier. If he stayed, he would get a medal. But I wouldn't blame him.
Did you ever have any doubts about why you were there?
No, absolutely no.
Never, ever?
Never, ever. I never regretted that I was there during the war. After all, it is our war for liberation and independence of the country.
Was there ever a time or a day when the whole thing just made no sense at all to you?
One day when I was terribly ill, I suffered from malaria. I didn't think about death then, but I felt terribly lonely. On the hammock, in the rainy season, deep in the forest.
One of the North's most decorated soldiers is Bui Tin, now a retired colonel. He fought for 37 years, first against the French, then the Americans, whose biggest mistake, he says, was the one-year tour of duty.
And he's devoted to the war only a half year. And the last half, he think to return to meet with her family, with his wife and children.
Did you hate the Americans?
No.
Be honest, come on.
Yes, honesty. No.
I'm talking about during the war,
During the war.
when you were in the mud.
Certainly.
When you are there in the battlefield, you know, your job is to fight. And you don't let hatred consume you in battle. And I think the good soldiers would, have his mind very alert while he was fighting. It was like a game.
Van Lay was a sergeant serving near Cucci in 1967. The Americans, he said, advanced on his bunker after an artillery barrage. He says he was scared stiff.
I saw an American soldier creeping toward me, and I could see only the top of his helmet, his green helmet, and I still remember that it looked like a beetle. And then I started to fire. I shot, and I saw the helmet jump up a little bit. And then it laid still. At that time I was very happy, because I could kill my enemy.
One man kills an enemy, another loses a friend. Each of these American veterans visiting Vietnam knows that loss. Bill Baldwin remembers a buddy.
That morning he was shot by a sniper in the stomach, and he was only not very far from me, and it took him 15 minutes to die, and the shock of that has never left me. And I can't remember his name. I think that's the thing that really bothers me. It's been, 20 years and I can't remember his name.
I cried a lot, when we have to bury my friend.
Have you seen his family?
Yes.
What did you tell them?
I told them how he died. And the family were very grateful that we were around and buried him. And they cried a lot. I visited them again last year.
Have they recovered?
I don't think they would ever recover.
Hung also lost a brother. He has no idea where he was killed, where he is buried.
My father would like to go and find him, but I explained to him how difficult it was to find, a missing body in the jungle. In Vietnam, we worship the ancestors and the dead, and the dead means a lot to the living.
The memorial at Trung San Cemetery pays tribute to the 10,000 men buried there. Hung could not find the burial place of his friend or his brother. They remain among the 300,000 missing, the bones of 30 divisions lying somewhere in the jungle. During the American War, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong lost about 1 million people. The country is a cemetery. What are your feelings when you walk through these thousands upon thousands of headstones?
I was so moved when I see them here. They are the best sons and daughters of Vietnam.
1 million people have been dead in war. And among them, they are all the brave men, the courageous men, intelligent, clever men.
Not all the dead were soldiers. Dr. Hua lost her only child, an infant son, to illness in the jungle.
Died in the jungle?
Yes. My only son.
Of what?
Because he has an encephalitis.
Encephalitis?
And it is not possible for us to treat him in the jungle. And I think for me, I have this experience, but it is a little experience if I compare with the other fighters.
It's not so little. One death is...
It is one death only, about a million of deaths.
General Vo Nguyen Giap, Commander-in-Chief of the North Vietnamese Army through both the French and American wars. Giap, near 80, is a national hero, second only in the hierarchy of saints to Ho Chi Minh himself. Did you ever have any pangs of conscience about sending those hundreds of thousands of men into what for many of them was going to be certain death?
Không có lúc nào.
Not for a single moment. I was always optimistic.
No doubts?
Không bao giờ.
No, never. Not a single
Không một
doubt.
chút nào.
Giap said that victory was worth any cost. As great as his losses were in the Tet Offensive, he says it brought the war into American living rooms. One sight familiar to Americans 20 years ago, certainly to every Marine, Marble Mountain. The Marines were dug in at its base. We knew the North Vietnamese had infiltrated and were launching rocket attacks on American positions. What we didn't know was that on the other side of the mountain, there were caves the size of cathedrals. We knew that all of our firepower must be taking a terrible toll. But we didn't know that in this cave, for example, part of a Buddhist monastery, there was a hospital treating hundreds of enemy wounded. Other caves housed battalions of North Vietnamese troops, a sanctuary safe from spotter planes and artillery. For 4 years, it remained a cool and comfortable haven amidst the hottest part of the war. For 8 years, the war dragged on, and then finally the day came, April 30th, 1975.
A lot of us cried when he heard the news that Saigon had surrendered. And we embraced each other, kissed each other, and then we just sat down and everybody thought about something. It was so quiet and silent for, say, 15 minutes or something. And then, you know, we had the order to move on.
At the presidential palace, the president of South Vietnam was waiting for the man who led the North Vietnamese troops into Saigon.
He said, "We are waiting for you, sir, from morning to transfer the power." And I replied immediately, "It is no problem of transfer of power. You have nothing in your head. All your power is collapsed. You must surrender. The problem is surrender." And so he's very, very sorry. And I see all the Vietnamese people is victorious. Only the American is defeated. And if you have a certain spirit, nationalist spirit, you can see this day as a day of choice.
So what are you, a good nationalist or a good communist?
I think that primarily I am nationalist. Nationalist. Ho Chi Minh also, for the independence. And after the communists come after. The communism come after.
For Dr. Hua, physician, spy, communist, the end of the war brought quick dissolution. In 1979, she left the party.
It is very uncomfortable to have an ideology because it is too static.
Too rigid.
Too rigid, too dogmatic. When we make the war, you think about the freedom, about the independence, and before all, to the happiness of your family. And when you return, you don't have this happiness. I think now, for the veteran of the Vietnamese veteran, it is very difficult for them to have a real happiness.
The pleasures of life in Vietnam are small. A whole generation, practically 2 generations, trying not so much to rebuild a nation as trying to pick up the pieces of their lives. Practically every veteran we talk to in Vietnam speaks of recurring dreams of the war, both foot soldiers and men who reached the rank of colonel. The nightmare is the common currency of American and Vietnamese veterans.
I have a nightmare and always cry. Some friend in the next room or in my room call, what happened, Mr. Nhot? I have a great fear.
Bay Van Not is 43. He lost the use of his legs when he stepped on a mine. It killed 3 of his friends. Not, like thousands of disabled veterans, lives a threadbare existence in this bleak institution tucked out of sight miles from Hanoi. To our eyes, it seems a pitiful reward for so many years of fighting, for such a heavy price paid.
Did seeing all that death make life more precious, or did it cheapen it?
Some of my friends, before they died, we talked to each other what we would do after the war. And I told them I would become a teacher. And it's a kind of promise to the dead. And when I returned to the university, to the college to study, all the time I thought about it. And I would work very hard to become a very good teacher.
Hung now teaches English at the Foreign Language Institute in Hanoi. He moonlights at a second school to support his wife and 2 sons. He says he does not dream of the war, but he hates the jungle, will not go into it. Some of his friends who survived are not so lucky.
One of my friends, he was a very nice young man when he was with me in the forest. After the war, he suddenly, sort of suffered from mental disorder. And he had to go home. And then they couldn't treat him at home. They had to send him to the mental asylum. And when I visited him, he couldn't recognize me. So I didn't go there again.
He didn't recognize you?
No. He didn't recognize me. He didn't recognize any of his family.
Van Lay has turned to writing since the war, but almost all of his work is about the war. Today, Van Lay is haunted by that American soldier he shot more than 20 years ago.
After peace, I came back to my home village, and I saw the mothers of those friends of mine who were killed in war. I saw how much suffering those mothers had to endure, and I thought that it could happen to the American mothers too. I think that any bullet, from whoever it could be, is shot at the mother first, not at the son who was killed.
Who won the war?
Nobody has a victory, because we are the victors in this war. If you tell about the war only, but after the war, you have many problems, and now we are not victorious.
It's something like fighting with somebody in your house with all the precious furniture around you. And after that stranger got out of your house, you looked at different things in your house. They were all broken. The war actually took place in our house. And now when we look at, things around us, it was really a very sad thing.
Van Lay's most recent work was a poem that captured some of those thoughts. How many American soldiers died in this land? How many Vietnamese lie buried under its trees and grass? The pain still lingers. Why should we remember it? We are old, our era past, our mistakes belong to bygone days. Now the wine glass joins friends in peace. The old men lift their glasses, tears ease down their cheeks.